How do you make money in government?
The money's there. Massive budgets. I mean, IT spend, for example, alone is $140 billion.
Is this someone that we want to partner with?
I'm curious, like, just quickly flip this question to you. Like, what when you see second time, first timer, what's the biggest gap that you see?
Hi, I'm Shuly Galili, and welcome to Runtime. On Runtime, we sit down with founders, operators, and investors to explore real stories behind technology companies and the markets around them. Today, I'm sitting down with Noam Maital, co-founder and CEO of Darwin AI. Noam Maital is a second-time founder, building at the intersection of AI and government. In our conversation, we unpack why governance may be the next critical layer in the AI stack, why founders who understand hard markets might have a real edge, and why it's important to eat your own dog food. Noam, welcome to Runtime.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Now, we've known each other for, over a decade now.
Yeah.
First, we met you when you were in your first journey as CEO and founder of Waycare, was a traffic management company selling to municipalities in the US. And that was acquired successfully. And Upwest was, privileged to back your first company. And now you are on your second journey as a founder, CEO of Darwin AI. We're going to dive a little bit into what Darwin is doing, and we're going to dive into a little bit of the market that you are in. It was an unusual market that you picked both times. And I think that for a lot of founders who are running away from selling to that kind of market, I'm really curious to go into a little bit more about the hard things about going after these kinds of markets, and also the opportunity that is absolutely incredible. So before we dive in, I want you to kind of talk to me a little bit about Darwin, your current company, and what excites you about this new journey, especially in the context of where we are with AI.
Well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. We've known each other for a long time, and it's great to be back. Darwin AI really is at the epicenter of helping governments embrace and adopt AI at scale. And that's kind of a big statement. So when you double click on that and you understand how government operates, the fundamentals, just jumping right into it for what Darwin does and why it's doing it, is the understanding that the predominant currency of government is not dollars. Our taxpayer money is going to them no matter what. That's the unfortunate truth. The most important currency for government is trust. And when you change the dynamics of how you think about that, and you think about the moment of AI, which everyone's adopting in the sense of, that's just as simple as using ChatGPT. It really presents this unique moment of transformation that in government is hitting differently. And what I mean by that is in the public sector, you first have to start with building the trust and the guardrails, which is the core of what Darwin does, is building guardrails around AI, both in terms of compliance, security, cybersecurity. But only then can you open up the faucet to real adoption at scale. And so what we see right now in government is a lot of small pilots of different vertical solutions of AI. None of the stuff you see from the private sector kind of really flowing in. And most of the focus, which we've been fortunate to be in that area, is really around what I call the infrastructure, the guardrails. Let's first get our control and visibility around all of our systems, make sure that as we adopt AI, we know what we're going to do with them. And that's at the core of what Darwin does, building full-scale guardrails around AI. And then based on that platform and enabling IT and CIOs and likewise the public sector, then start to build with them on that trust of building agentic workflows across their various departments, becoming their trusted AI partner for all of their AI activities to come.
A lot of the things that we are talking about when go-to-market happens for a lot of founders is, do you need to educate your customers? Who are you selling to in these markets? Because it's not enterprise sales as we know it.
Yeah.
In the kind of more of a private sector, you're going into the public sector where behavior is different, where you say trust is really valued. So take me a little bit deeper into why is this conversation with your customer is super unique, and what's unique about it that is much harder to do than when you go and sell to a CIO or a CISO in the private market.
I think it's misunderstood, which you're correct in stating. I'll give you an anecdote of how misunderstood. I was in a IC meeting with a VC, a very well-known VC, and there's a whole team out there of I think it was 15 people in the room. And I'm talking about what Darwin does. This was early on. And I understood the problem and the differentiation, but the market really sees it as one and the same. One of the partners stood up and said, I don't understand why someone from the private sector wouldn't do this in public sector. And, I stood up and explained, but I guess the point is when you look at government, a small city or a big city has the same mindset as serving their citizens, and they're the decision makers. So they're their own Google. They're this big behemoth. Even if they're a small city, the mayor controls decisions. And so therefore, they want to be able to operate horizontally across all of their guardrails. And what's happening in the private sector, which for a good reason, security solutions are bifurcated to kind of very vertical specific, focusing on LLM jailbreak or on the orchestration layer or on just GRC, kind of the high level governance in our world. And so the conversation with CISOs there usually gets segmented to best in class solutions, which is what you see in the cybersecurity market. And in government, it's a completely different stakeholder where the CIO is usually only partially technical, not as deep in the weeds of all the cybersecurity. And he has to do more with a lot less, meaning he has to cover all the elements of cybersecurity, compliance, guardrails, public records, and those have to come into one solution. So right off the bat, the product itself is completely different. But then you also get to the nature of the customers itself, which I talked a little bit about, where you're addressing government needs that are completely different. So I gave one example, public records. Every government entity has the requirement to provide public records if they receive a request. There's Freedom of Information Act. I'm giving that as a feature in a product that would never appear in the private sector. So every action you do on a note taker not only has to be archived, but it has to be tagged with the right metadata. So if you get a request for public records from your citizens, you're complied to respond to it. Now, there's 1,000 other feature requests and things like that are requirements by law that wouldn't appear in an enterprise solution or private sector. And so you really have to understand the government. I wouldn't call it vertical. I often call it a horizontal to be able to build the right product there. And most of the market doesn't, which is why I love the GovTech market, because it's if you know, and
Yes.
whoever's in it knows what the market size is and the opportunity.
And I think that, we've seen companies like Palantir and companies like that have totally understood the opportunity. And you're now selling in millions to this sector. But in the beginning, when you were just looking into it, and AI it was just introduced to all of us, right? Were you thinking, okay, I know that governments will adopt AI, or did you have to go and actually find out how fast this will actually be something that, these CISOs and CIOs in governments will want to introduce? Are they more risk averse in terms of that? Do they think that this is something that will make them more efficient? More create more cost effectiveness, across their departments? Where is it that you decided that, yes, this is a market, they're ready. This is not going to happen in 2 or 3 years and a long procurement situation?
You can't guess the wave of when, you can't time the market, as they famously say. But I think a lot of learnings that came from my first time, I was bringing into this from a GovTech, having built Waycare and sold it, and then bring it into Darwin. But specifically, and I talk a lot with my friends and founders about this, there's a big focus sometimes when you build a company or ideation on what is the solution. And I always heavily discount what your solution is in the beginning. I think it's way more focused on understanding the problem. And search for a big problem, you'll have a big opportunity. You'll figure out the product along the way. We definitely have a different product today than what we started with when I first pitched you the idea. But more specifically, what I saw was this. AI was already here. Everyone's using ChatGPT and the likes. It was still not, agentic or anything of that, but it was becoming a day-to-day work assistant. And in government, when we looked and asked anecdotally, so I just doing conversations with leadership and employees that I had from my network from Waycare, everyone was using ChatGPT because why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you summarize your emails and do that? I use it day to day, so they were as well. Our data was showing above 60-70% of employees were using ChatGPT at least weekly. So that's on one side. You have this consumer-driven usage that's happening, and they're not allowed to even use it. They're just using it. The employees at the bottom are using it. On the other side, you had the elected officials who were, again, doing the trust move, right? Putting policy, regulation. And 2024, when we started Darwin, there was this wave of across the states of AI regulation, how AI applies to privacy, how it applies to public records. And bills were flying right and left, and consultants were loving it. Lobbyists were making lots of money. But underneath that, I saw what was evolving as a massive problem, which is these bills have to be implemented. Now, take it back to my Waycare data traffic management. When the rule came around seatbelts, okay, car manufacturers had to go and put seatbelts on their car by law. Or when you put a speed limit rule, police then knows how to enforce it. When you put a law around AI that says you may not have LLM drift in your environment or make sure you're managing it, and you have full inventory coverage of all AI systems, when you know there's embedded AI, what happens is the CIO, who's the person in charge of enforcing it, has no tools today in the market for them in government to actually take the law and apply it. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, which is what I saw, where employees are using it illegally, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Mayors and elected officials are putting the laws that then the CIO has to comply with, and they're stuck between a rock and a hard place to try and implement it. So that was the problem. I didn't know yet what the solution was going to look like, but I knew that if I came into that wedge and solved it, the solution would be it would be worth more than just that layer of solving that problem for the CIO. It would be the beginning of who gets to put the standards of how AI gets adopted in government. So that was the beginning. To say I knew all of that would unfold to what Darwin is right now, I can't say that was that. But again, I knew the problem was there. I didn't know the timing of it. And frankly, when I came to you and Gil, and I did the first raise, I said, look, I'm now experienced with government. It's going to be 3 years runway. We're going to wait patiently, because I didn't know the timing of the market. I was pleasantly surprised when the market pushed us and the urgency was more than I expected. An agency said, I need this tomorrow. I have to have this because my mayor's pushing me on this. So I didn't know the timing, and the timing actually in government's pushing itself much shorter than what we thought.
Yeah. I mean, we are all kind of surprised by the speed that things are being adapted and how fast founders have to move today to catch up on a lot of the things that customers demand from them, because these tools are being introduced, because they are being updated constantly, and because agents are being adapted faster than we thought, even in markets like manufacturing and governments and places where we didn't think that adoption will happen. And it brings me into another conversation that I think that we had and we have with a lot of founders, and that is, how do you drink your own Kool-Aid in terms of building an AI-operated company yourself and adapting the tools and building, agents yourselves within your company and building an AI-first company versus an AI adapting, externally companies. How do you as a founder think about that in today's market? And are we overthinking it, or is it really truly as something that is really important for founders to know today as they build their own companies?
No,
because the playbook has really
overthinking it.
changed.
Yeah, the playbook has changed. I think even the thinking around how you adopt AI has changed in just the last 6 months. this is a lot of the conversations among CEOs and my friends are around, it was around this topic now, because there's one part of it, which is, okay, how do you push out to production products that are AI enabled, and what does that look like? People have talked about the apocalyptics of for SaaS and all that, but internally there's also a big discussion on, okay, how do I bring this home and eat my own dog food in terms of AI? And right now there's a whole, I wouldn't call it movement, but the focus on how do you move from being like AI assisted to native AI. And what I mean by that is, if up until now, let's say a year ago, 6 months ago, most of the use of AI was your R&D developer was writing with Claude Code, it would assist him. Your other employees would use ChatGPT, create cool stuff, maybe Gamma for some PowerPoints, and you would be an AI first company because you were very forward leaning. In the last 6 months, and I think really, Claude Code and 4.6 coming out, and then Codex and others, where they really took the leap where the coding element, or the vibe coding as they call it, and agentic AI became something that was market ready, at least for those that were ready to adopt it fully. And then the possibilities are limitless. And what I mean by that is, I was giving a webinar on the topic of vibe coding. I said, it's no longer about how good of a developer you are. It's about how good your ideas are and how specific you can be on articulating them. So I build now things that I want to show my team of things that we want to build, and I give them first MVP, and I can do it in an hour. Now that's something I would have to describe to the team, have a whole team come back on it, where now I sit with Claude Code, right, and start to develop that. So the big question is, how do you now bring that in where you're building agents and agentic processes, not on everything, but definitely at the core layer, so that rather than a distributed organization as you had in the past, sales talks to marketing, talks to business development, that, then puts it down to product talks to R&D. You kind of switch the whole model where everything feeds into this centralized agentic model, where you have agentic solutions that some of them are running autonomously based on tasks that are allowing to connect the dots between all the different systems. So sales doesn't become like its own element anymore. If there's a new lead that requires some new feature, you don't have to sit up and write a PRDN or request on it. Automatically can flow in from the transcription, and then it will translate that documentation to technical requirements. And the R&D now close the loop on something that would have taken a week. Companies that aren't doing that are going to be left behind, because that's where we're headed, and it's only going to keep accelerating in terms of the agentic AI.
And as you're doing a company the second time, it's almost you have to unlearn what you learned before in this new environment. And also, when you thinking about your team building, now you're in the beginning still of building Darwin. And when you're thinking about building this company in terms of talent, you touched a little bit about, what kind of people, it's no longer enough that you're a genius coder. There needs to be different type of skills that you bring to the table. And so CEOs and founders have to evaluate differently the talent that they're bringing to the company. How do you build the company from a talent perspective in this environment? And where do you think founders now put more emphasis on when they bringing people into the team?
Well, I think it's such a disruptive moment, even internally for organizations, because we're like the ushering in of the next industrial revolution. So we don't need, one thing that's changed is I don't look at the success of the company tied to the growth of our team in terms of number of employees. In fact, it's almost inverse. And usually in startups, early stage, it wasn't like that, right? You raise another round, your revenue's growing, like hire up like crazy and grow the team. No, you think almost inversely where, okay, how do I keep bringing in more revenue with the same amount of team and automate everything underneath? So then the thought process on the team, you become much more selective. I spend a lot more time, even at Waycare, I spend a lot of time hiring, but now I spend even more time sourcing the candidates themselves. And some people may say, well, that's a waste of time, but it isn't if you think that I want a company that will, generate 100 million in revenue to be 30, 40 people. And I think that's possible today, but only if you really select people who, to your point, yes, they're talented. They have to have the talent, but it isn't about how good they are at coding. It's about how talented are they in conceptualizing ideas, asking the right questions, being able to put ego aside, which is a huge thing now because essentially Claude and agentic AI can do a lot of the work for you. So you got to be ready to hand over all the skills you learned. To your point, doesn't matter anymore. Let AI do the parts that it can do well and focus your effort and time on the core skills, which is choosing the architecture, choosing the right systems. How do you scale? Those are still human led, and it will be at least for the near future. And so I guess the core has been about how do I build the right dynamics of teams that is small, and each person, while they need to be still team workers, they also have to have this independent drive to be able to build their own flows autonomously with agentic AI, because each person is going to have their own little minions of agentic AI working for them. They have to be understanding of how all that concept needs to work and embrace it.
Do you think that your customers are also thinking that way? Do you think that they are thinking about reduction in workforce, automating their tasks, and hiring differently than?
So controversial statement. Most people think government's bloated.
Yeah.
Or many people do. I would say most. And in state and local, by and large, it's not true.
Yeah.
What is true is that they want to do, there's no increases in budgets generally. It's usually flat or cut. So the question always is for government at the state and local, and you go to a random city across the US, is how do I provide better services, but at the same or less budget? Usually they don't want to cut any headcount because, again, they want to keep their employees. They get their taxpayer money. They know generally balanced budgets, the cities that work well. So AI, again, is this disruptive moment because it's always been, all right, we're going to digitalize services and the internet and it's going to be better. And you can now go to the DMV online. That's nice. But when you all of a sudden bring agentic AI, you can now tell your call center that deals with what 311, I need a new trash or this broke. All of a sudden, you don't have to do that with a army of people. You can scale that with agentic AI and have personal relationships to your citizens with it enabled with AI under the same cost purview. Now, that being said, that is the part that's interesting to government. I think they're very skeptical of all the promises that vertical AI solutions are coming in with because it's a hype market. Everything we said about agentic AI now could be then taken to the other side of it, which every company is out there saying,
We're AI.
We're AI and we change the world, like put us in and everything changes. And we know that's not true. In government, it's especially the case that it's not true. And so they're pushing back. And that's exactly, I guess, the thesis of Darwin, which is it's never going to start first from the verticalization of solutions with AI, ripping out the legacy, not in government. It's going to first come from the infrastructure, from the guardrails, and then with slow incremental workflows on the agentic AI that will sit in between the cracks of their existing systems that will allow for AI to be embraced in a way that starts to really bring change management.
Do you see the impact? When do you see the impact of that, adoption?
I'll give an example. One of the things that we're building on the workflow, so we have two products. We have Darwin Govern, which does the guardrails. We talked about that. The other one is Launchpad. And Launchpad is once we build guardrails, we then work with the agency on building agentic AI solutions. One of them is Redacted. Now, Redacted on its face is a really simple solution. It's public records. Employees have the requirement to deliver public records. But when they do that, they spend a huge amount of time manually redacting documents. So if they're asking for an accident that happened on a junction and you were in that accident, they got to remove your information about you, right? That's your privacy. So they manually go and do that. We built a flow where they take that document and automate that with AI. So pushing that to them and then into their existing systems saves them massive amounts of time. But those are small little increments, and that's where they're starting at. They're not yet at a place where, voice AI is taking over all their 311s. They're not there yet. It's emerging. That part's going to happen slower in government just because government, again, is a lot more cautious, risk averse. And that's one part. And two, there's existing entrenchments of legacy systems that are built on the vertical side of procurement, HR, et cetera, that these are software companies that say they're putting AI, and really it's just like a widget that's running on their existing legacy software.
That's amazing. I think that we're just in the beginning of all this transformation. We spoke a little bit about how Darwin is building a unique team around this. And you mentioned trust as something that is very important to your customers. And I think trust is a huge word today when it comes to adopting AI. And we definitely see it on the cybersecurity side. But I think that when you're thinking about going after this sector, the kind of talent you need on the go-to-market still needs to be very people typecasts.
Yeah.
People who can build trust, who understand the nuances in selling to local cities and local, states, and understand the politics that involves in all of this, and also understand budgets.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that is misunderstood about government as well, is how do you make money? How do you make money in government?
Government's misunderstood. I mean,
Yes.
but on the money side particularly, first of all, again, every VC for the most part I've met, or most of them, will say, oh, you're in the GovTech vertical. And I say, well, it's not a vertical, it's a horizontal, which
Yeah.
you heard me say earlier. But the reason I say it is because a third of the GDP in our country is government.
Yeah.
And so if a third of the market is coming from one place, it's not a vertical, it's a horizontal. The second reason it's a horizontal is because in government, you have not just, it's not like a finance vertical. You have finance in government, you have procurement, you have legal, you have all these different functions. And what's interesting is when you look at the vendors that are sold into these markets, they're almost completely different from the private sector. So it's a parallel universe of ecosystem of GovTech vendors. Now, when you realize that, then you realize, okay, how do you reach the money? The money's there.
Yeah.
Massive budgets. I mean, IT spend, for example, alone is $140 billion on these kind of systems, and they are now requiring AI. So massive market, but you're right. It's really tricky because it's a different mechanism. They can't just go and buy. They have to use RFPs or other mechanisms. When I sold Waycare, I told my wife, all right, I'm never doing government again, and I'm not doing transportation again. And it was because it was so freaking hard for 5 years. Just how do you scale and selling, and you'd sell and then politics would get in the way. But then when I started realizing the opportunity with Darwin, or the problem and how big it was, I said, wait, I'm actually throwing away the biggest advantage I have, which after 5 years of building Waycare, I learned where those budgets are and how you access them. And there's all kinds of tricks that are more in the weeds we can get to, like resellers and different distribution channels you need to know. But the trick, and just as true to any market, is look at what your best in class in that sector is doing, and then go really down in the weeds of their tactics of their business plan. So if you look at a company like Tyler, right? They go and they will have, Tyler is a $24 billion company in the GovTech space. They do everything from like record management for prisons, all that stuff. If you dive down into their contracts, you'll see they have reseller agreements. They have what's called GSA, which is general services. And so they'll put these blanket contracts in place that give the ability to draw out kind of funding on them. They work with these national contracts, co-ops they're called, where it allows for other agencies to come in without a procurement, out an RFP requirement. These are little tricks that I only learned 3-4 years into Waycare. Yeah. And only then when I started to apply them, I started to see scale. At Darwin, we put in national agreement we just announced with Caresoft, which is one of the largest, IT SIs out there that has cooperative purchasing across the country with 70% of the agencies. We put that out a year after we started the company, which is massive. So that allowed me, I had a bottleneck of procurement that was sitting. And the minute we announced the partnership and put that in place, within 2 weeks, we were able to switch all of them to signed contracts. So the money's there.
The money's there.
It's following the tactics. It's the minute little details
Exactly
that will get you to unlocking it, assuming you have a really good solution in a problem that has urgency with it. And there isn't a legacy entrenchment of another system. So there is the complexity there, but that's the nuance on the money side.
You touched a little bit about the experience from Waycare. That was your first experience with this sector, first experience as a CEO, building a company, hiring people, thinking about who's going to invest in, a GovTech company. I think predicting accidents in cities was kind of like a huge mission to go after. Tactically, definitely challenging, and then understanding, how that scales. You sold that successfully. And as you mentioned, you decided to go the second time and the second time into the public sector. Like, who does that?
Crazy people.
Crazy people does that. But when we talked to you the first time about the idea and thinking about doing a company another time, time in another sector, we, I think, felt that the judgment and the decisions as a second-time founder will probably look different for you. And I want to kind of dive into that a little bit, because you're thinking about how you look at intention when building the company the second time. Where do you see, these decisions coming to play in both picking your co-founder, building it,
That's a whole episode on its own, the
It's a
co-founder
whole
side.
episode on
Yeah.
its own. But talk to me a little bit about, things that you will never do today that you did before.
Wow. Okay. First of all, I got into GovTech with Waycare.
Yeah.
It was the early days of like AI in the sense of machine learning and deep
Yes.
learning, recurrent neural networks, and TensorFlow from Google came out. There's all kinds of, that was the cool thing back then. And said, okay, where can we apply it? Ironically, we were needing data, and there was public records on crash records, and we took the kind of jump in from there, completely unaware of how difficult government is. So that was kind of the first timer naivete that we went into. Now I'll break it down. In terms of founders, I think I learned a ton. I had a whole journey in my last company with founders. You guys are very familiar with it. And I think, again, that would be a whole episode on its own that we don't have to open up. But one thing I think I valued, put too much value on, was talent, resume, experience, like the dry facts. And I didn't understand enough about how important ego was. Just very basic, right? When you become a founder, it's a weird situation where you're running a company and you have your role, like you're a CEO, you're a CPO, you're a CTO, but at the same time, you're wearing a different hat completely of this founder who, it's your baby, you're on the board, you're making the decisions. And that's a really strange thing to learn from your career if you worked as a salaried employee. And so if you don't have the ability to put your ego at check, or at least be aware that you have it and put it aside in those moments, it creates a lot of what we know as founder conflicts. And I think the first time I experienced that, second time, very fortunate. And I think in my conversations early on with Asaf, my co-founder and CTO, we discussed this very openly. I shared my fears. We talked about situations. And there was an understanding together of what that looks like, where for us, we didn't care like who made the decision, or if we, if one person had the idea versus the other, but it was the better one. It was just, how do we build a successful company? That's on the founder side. I think the government side specifically, I had a big learning, which was, so yes, I said never government again, never transportation, but the second piece was more important. I was building into a vertical in government, and government was hard, and I was kind of limiting my market there. And when I looked at Darwin and understood that I have the knowledge of budgets and how to access money there, and the size of the opportunity, I realized here we really do have a horizontal solution, because our customers today are not just transportation agencies or just cities. It's airports, it's transit, it's cities, it's states, it's counties, it's education boards, it's universities. Any living organization in the public sector that has IT has requirements. So it makes our selling point much more similar in its motion of the go-to-market to private sector, where I have a big scale, a big pool. I can, pipeline it at scale. I can run automations on it. Before, I had 50 bullets to shoot, which were 50 state DOTs, and every one of them had to hit perfectly. And so lots of steak dinners and lots of wine and dining and whatnot. And that was a hard thing to scale, which is what ultimately led me to sell, Waycare when we got to that point, because I realized it's going to be continuous uphill battle in this kind of vertical. And then the second piece was understanding entrenchment of systems as well. So like in government, when you have a system that's embedded, it can be crappy. As long as it's completely not working, if it's not completely not working, it will stay there for the next 10 years. So what I realized in this moment with Darwin is there's the whole new standard that needs to be built. So it's greenfield. And that is such a rare opportunity in government. that allowed us to come in and not say, oh, well, here's why you're going to need to rip and replace the system.
Yeah.
It's let us tell you what the standard is. And that drove a lot of kind of the decision. Then the last piece I'll say is on the decisions, just as a first timer versus second timer. I thought every decision I had to make was like a really important big decision. I got to get it right. And I would focus heavily on considerations of every decision. Second time I realized the velocity and the speed is more important than if you got one or two decisions right. It's whether the cumulative of decisions were made quickly and the majority of them are in the right direction, because speed is your biggest asset.
Right.
And I've been very focused on prioritizing that, knowing that I'm making mistakes along the way, being okay with them, not being stressed about it, and understanding that what's going to differentiate me from being able to compete against Amazon and Google and the likes is the speed at which we operate. And that's something that's been a lot of fun because I don't have that stress I used to have a little bit at Waycare around this.
And I think, we see it with a lot of second-time founders is that, the first time you put a lot of focus on things that ultimately, at the end of the day, wouldn't matter in the long run, right? But there are certain things that matter in the long run. And I think that we've had a lot of experience with you in your fundraising processes, in Waycare and now in Darwin. When you think about as a founder that has to go out and raise capital, what are the things that you think, you're doing differently and thinking differently about that, venture ecosystem and how you interact with that ecosystem today, what you're thinking about, how to read that.
Yeah.
And seeing that velocity is one of the most important, I think, fact that you need to put focus on. Fundraising is obviously part of the journey.
Yes.
What do you think about that today versus what you thought about it in the beginning?
I would be remiss not to say that, like, as a second timer, there's just an element of it that makes it so much easier.
Yeah.
Even from VC's perspective, they tend to have this understanding that if you're a second timer and you've had an exit, that's going to be a better bet. And so they come to you, which, as someone, I always call it beggar and chooser.
Yeah.
So at Waycare, when we started Waycare, I was definitely a beggar. I went to over 100 VCs, got tons of no's. People would call it the G word, government. When you hear the G word, I'd immediately see the phone pop up.
Yeah.
And I knew that was the end of the meeting. Now it's completely different. But at the core of it, I think one of the biggest understandings I had in terms of fundraising was there's a balance of power that happens between a VC and a founder. Usually, in first timers, what I see often is the minute they enter the meeting, the balance shifts where the VC holds the power of like questioning and examining you, and the entrepreneur is trying to convince you. Now, yes, they're the one giving you the money. That's fair. Upwest invested in Darwin, and so there's a power in that. But when you flip it and say, I'm going to choose if I'm going to let you give me money. And I know that sounds cocky, but that's the mindset you really have to embrace. And I see it more with second timers when they come in the room and they'll tell you what they're doing. And when they do it well, they do it humbly, they can turn the other way around. They're coming all bloat, cocky and whatnot. But I hope when I do it right, when I'm sitting with investors, I no longer come with this stance of, I got to convince you like why you're going to invest in me. No, I'm going to tell you what the vision is, what my story is. And I want you to tell me why you're the right investor for us as well. And we're going to be partners on this as equals, right? You're going to be investing. You're going to get back a lot of money if we do well. And I want to have this long-term relationship. That dynamic, just alone, it's subconscious almost, changed.
I see that in first-time founders too, by the way.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it can be.
Tell me why you will invest in my company.
But it's a slippery slope. It's not about the question as much as almost the behavior.
Exactly.
When someone comes in and they're truly interested to know from the VC why they're a good partner versus like, tell me why I should take your money.
Yes.
There's that too. It can be slippery slope. And I saw it a little bit when I was on the VC side. It was interesting. But with second timers that are good, they don't care anymore about the stance of the pompousness of which VC and what. They want to know, like, all right, you're in front of me here. I have 3-4 options. I believe I can get money. We're going to be on this journey for 3-4 years. We already know that at least. Why are we going to be a good fit to work together?
Yeah.
And when that's done authentically, I think it does two things. One, you find better partners. But two, it creates the most important ingredient for VCs, which is FOMO.
Yeah.
They all start wanting to kind of be engaged in that, and they feel the confidence. And that obviously has been very helpful as we fundraise. I think first timers can get that, but they have to have some mentoring from people
Yeah.
who've been there before on that.
And I think that there is definitely now a lot of that dynamic in the marketplace in terms of, the FOMO around certain companies and how,
The concentration's real,
the
right? There's a lot more.
concentration and how VCs are operating in that environment. I think it's also different at the stages that you are. Like,
What do you see? I'm curious to just quickly flip this question to you. Like what, when you see second time, first timer, what's the biggest gap that you see?
I think because we are such early stage investors, like we are the first check.
Yeah.
We put a lot of emphasis on the founder mentality and the founder agility, especially in this market. And I think that beyond, do we bring value? Do we do this? Do we do that? I think that if you're a second time founder and you're not self-aware of your blind spots, of where you made mistakes, of how you did things that, didn't serve the company the first time, how you are thinking about the second time, in a more intentful way. I think there's a lot of conversations around that beyond just what market you're going after, beyond just, are you going to be able to compete the second time? And do you have that resilience and at the same time hunger that you had the first time? And so I think that
hunger piece is important, by the way.
It's so important.
Because it's easy to get a second timer, like, all right, I've been there, done that. I'm very conscious of that, by the way, as well, because I think about it all the time. And I often say, like Asaf, with my co-founder, it's great. He's a first timer. He was the first employee in companies that were acquired. But I always want to remind myself not to be like, oh, I've been there, done that, so I know it works.
Yes.
Like that's actually, I think, a disadvantage of second timers. The naivete that first timers bring. I'm trying to, if I'm successful, I'm trying to bring a hybrid version where like me and Asaf together bring the belief of the naivete of first time with the experience of second time managing a company.
That's what I see. And I think that the partnership for the long haul is, what we feel is the most important thing when we talk to founders is definitely, is this someone, as we know, 10 years now together, is this someone that we want to partner with for the next 10 years? It's a long-term relationship, and definitely kind of dig into ourselves being partners in this journey and being privileged to be part of the journey, but also how are we growing with this founder through, I think very tumultuous situations along the way where things are not always going to be, up and to the right. When I think that we want to believe that, but as we know, so many things can go wrong.
And they will, right? That's I always say, when I'm talking to first timers and they're talking about certain investors, like assume when things go wrong, what is your belief level that partner is going to be on your side? Because the truth of the matter is, on the financial side, we have inverse priorities, right?
Yeah.
Like in some ways.
Yeah.
VCs, their priority is to return money to their LPs and do that at a high multiple very fast, like as quickly as possible. And for a founder, that's not always the case. There's a lot of different dynamics there. So the question always becomes, is that partner in front of you when there's things that you will believe in and the times are tough, are they going to stand with you, or is that inverse relationship going to come to bear? And I've been on both sides.
Yes.
Now, thankfully, Upwest, so it's been with me long term, which is why we keep going together. But it's not an intuitive one for the VC founder relationship.
Which brings me to, when we talk about journey, when we talk about kind of going 0 to 1, especially, as we look at it from an investor perspective, helping with strategy, talking about setting goals, getting ready for the next growth of a company. Waycare and Darwin are companies that you built with a unique structure that I think is very common for a lot of companies out of Israel. And that is, you build 2 organizations at the same time. You build engineering that is, very strong organization in one time zone, and in the other time zone is where your customers are, where you have to be really, really close to market, where you really have to create a lot of interest in customers and spend meaningful time there. And also build an organization of people who have the talent to sell, to do marketing, to business development. And so how do you build these two organizations at the same time? What did you learn in your first experience building Waycare in that ability? How important is it for founders to be close to market and to build that kind of organization, especially today?
I mean, that's probably the trickiest part, I think, for Israeli founders and companies in general, because by and large, the market's US, maybe it's Europe or Asia, but I could speak from perspective if your market is the United States. And usually, I'm fortunate to be dual citizen, so I have a little bit more understanding. I lived in the US, but you build this technical team, great product initially, usually with R&D in Israel. And then you take it to product to the US, and there's the complete different set of elements that come colliding straight into you. Like, how do you run a meeting, right, with Americans? And how do you do that properly? And so I think one thing I learned this time around, definitely there's a big lessons learned from Waycare. I tried to run very, for as long as I could with some minimal US presence on the go-to-market side. And the Israeli team would be highly involved on a lot of the commercial activities. Now that created a lot of conflicts beyond even just kind of the language barriers and stuff, but cultural stuff, and also just dynamics that were much more difficult to manage. The other thing is I hired just purely based on experience and last time in the market in the US for the go-to-market. So I took very senior people that had kind of all the, this time around, again, it's a little bit different. I have a much more grounded understanding of the market, and I'm much closer to it from a network perspective as well. But the second piece is early on, when first year into our selling, I already started building out our go-to-market team, and pretty widely. Like we have AEs now across different regions, West and East and Central. We have Dustin as our Chief AI Officer, who kind of leads our US office and Chief AI Officer. The need to be US centric and a US company from a commercial side, I can't overstate how important that is. It's like a Israeli going to buy hummus. If I went to a hummus shop here in, let's say, at Palo Alto, and I was like, yeah, I'll have hummus, and the other guy answered me in English like, oh, sure, yeah, I'll give you a hummus. Like, no, sorry, no, thank you. And of course, right, we want the real thing. So Americans, not that different. When you're in Tampa, Florida, and they're buying your solution, they want you to be American, to have that trust among them on their product side. So you have to do that authentically with people here. And then it's about choosing people that, fit for the solution that you're trying to sell. But then the other part, which is I would say almost a secret sauce that's hard to put a science to it, it's more of an art, is Americans that know how to work with Israelis. And so usually if I try to distill that, it would be people who are okay with a zero bullshit mentality of getting to the point. They like that, but still can work in like the American environment, the US environment. And so I've really focused on that. People that can take feedback quickly, that don't look to have all the fluff around them, don't get insulted. Because Israelis, right, they get straight to the point.
Oh, yeah.
And you can have a fight in a meeting, come out of it and like best friends, right?
Yeah.
And that dynamic's very different than the US culture. So finding people who appreciate that, I think is a huge value add. Some people who've had experience before, Americans work with Israeli companies, is another telltale sign of like something that will work better because they're already familiar. But I've heavily prioritized building out that team earlier on and scaling it so that we have the learnings from there. First time Waycare definitely didn't do it right.
I totally see that, because a lot of the conversations we have early on with founders, they think building the product will be the biggest challenge. They think raising money is going to be a huge difficulty for them. And for me, I've always seen that hiring and knowing how to hire talent in the US specifically is probably one of the biggest challenge for founders out of Israel. who have never lived here,
And specifically sales.
and specifically sales.
It's
And I think that is the conversations that we're having with our entire portfolio all the time, is that, how do you really know that this person sitting in front of you is the best?
Yeah.
Because they all sound great.
the best way. I'll give you an example from Darwin. I knew when we hired Dustin to our team. I mean, we worked together already. I've known him for years. I've worked with him in the industry. We had him on as advisor. So it was almost an intuitive decision. And when we brought on, I knew we worked well together. That, I mean, for Israelis, being close to your employee you're going to hire, maybe working with them a little bit before, feeling how you'd work together on the day-to-day in person. So if you have to be there locally in country, of course, as well with that person. And then that first hire is really, really critical because they're going to bring the other hires. So the folks that came onto our team that we're very fortunate to have, some of them Dustin brought in, were people he worked with for years. And now they have trust in Dustin and I have trust in Dustin. Therefore, now we built a team that all has trust in. So that first, second employee, validate the hell out of them more than what you would for a regular employee, not just in the sense of the interview process, but the time you spend with them to really have the confidence that this is going to be a foundation that you're building your US team out of.
So tactically, what I hear from you is building a go-to-market team as early as you can, really putting emphasis on the kind of person you bring in as your first hire in the US, primarily interfacing with your customers.
Yep.
And that will then set the tone for the other talent that you will bring in. And really building an American organization.
Especially now in the era of AI, where the metrics that VCs are looking for is more revenue early on. So that's kind of a key piece there. Again, starting as early as you can in the go-to-market hiring process in the US.
I think we're out of time, right? So that was fun. Thank you, Noam.
Loved it.
Really enjoyed talking to you and you bringing so much insights to kind of the journey that you're taking with Darwin. And we wish you all the success. Wish us all the success.
Yes, all of us. Thanks, Shuly. Great being here.
Thank you.